When you think about travel, what is the very first thing that comes to mind? If you're a person without a disability, what do I got to do to plan for it? Oh, let's plan our activities, our plane tickets, that. Traditional things when somebody's talking about going on a vacation. But when you're somebody who has a disability, those parts are the easy parts. And unless you're used to traveling with a disability, you may not know exactly what it is you need to do. And that is what today's episode is about. When you think about travel, what is the first thing you think about, and what is the thing you dread about it the most? One of the things when you're disabled or using mobility equipment, some of the things you really need to pay attention to when you're planning to go someplace is accessibility. You've got to think about terrain. You've got to think about battery power if you're using an electronic scooter or even a power wheelchair. There is going to be wear and tear on your body because of the fact that it is a lot of extra effort to do these things. Another thing you've got to actually consider, venues may say they're accessible, but the question is always accessible for who? Are they talking about people who have minor disabilities, or are we talking about people with mobility accessibility needs? With the castles, their doorways are not designed to deal with mobility aids. They've got historical meanings and they can't make some of the adaptations that we need. Are there enough accessible needs for those who've lost their hearing or lost their sight? Is there a lot of sensory overload which can affect people with neurodivergence? Is there there's so many different needs that an individual has that there is no way any venue can be accessible for everybody. So you've got to find out if it's accessible for you. When it comes to taking a journey, like the trip we've got coming up is a trip to York, and we're planning for 3 weeks. What is it that actually is entailed in a trip like this? You've got to travel to your destination, which is about 6 hours from here. We're in the van in a trailer. So we'll have to take slower. The time of driving from one place to the next. 6 hours, but with my partner and I both having disabilities, we break it in half. We take one 3 hour trip and we stay for 2 days in one place, and then we go on to our actual destination. You question why? Why not just do it in straightforward, especially if you're in the States where 6 hours is nothing to us? The reason why is fatigue. We want to enjoy our holiday. We want to build in recovery time for the drive. This is especially important with fibro. Another thing you really have to pay attention to is their accessible parking. You have a disability placard. How close is the disability access to where you want to go? So, like we were going to a campsite, so we had to find out if they had disability accessible toilets, showers, as well as how close are they to our campsite. I'm sure you dealt with disability bays when you go to the grocery store. It's the same with venues. And some of them, say like with the medieval fair, they've got a side entrance, which is where they actually save a very close car park and they shut it down to anybody who did not have a disability badge. So that they enable you to get parking that is disabled, that is very near to a side entrance. That's also something you need to find out before you travel. What about possibly a drop-off point? If there is no close parking, is there public transport available? And is it accessible? When it comes to mobility scooters and buses, especially here in the UK, or trains, you have to be very specific width maximum. Otherwise, you can't actually get on a bus, on a train. And even with the trains, they expect you to have someone with you. Otherwise, you've got to make arrangements with the authority to have someone accompany you. And they will send an employee to accompany you to your destination. That needs to be planned in advance. And another thing that you consider is, will the journey take too much out of you? Can you extend it to give yourself breaks? That's ultimately why we planned for 21 days, because we wanted to give ourselves time between events to relax and to regain our energy. When it came to the fair, the journey was about 2 hours. So we left 3 hours in advance. It gave us time to take a break in the drive, to get parked, get our scooters out, as well as get to the entrance. And we got there quite early. But when it comes to stress, if you can get there early, it means you're going to be less stressed before you go to enjoy your outing. And well, I'm typical military. If I'm not 15 minutes early, I'm 15 minutes late. So it's just a habit, but it's one that actually benefits my fibromyalgia. Find out where the accessible entrance is, because some of them are not always in the main entrance. Is there a separate queue? Because I know when I was young, I had my best friend was in a wheelchair, and we would go to Disneyland. But because she was in a wheelchair, they moved us to the front of the line because it was easier for them. Some of them, they do not want you booking online. In fact, many sites, they specifically state if you have accessibility needs, call. What you do is you pre-book on the phone, which is better for you because you can take care of a lot of these little questions and get them all answered in one phone call, and it can decide whether or not you can even go. Another thing that is not so common in the States, but is here in the UK, is do you have a carer? Or do you have an individual with you to help you get around? Because a lot of these venues, what they'll do is they'll give you a carer's ticket, which means they get in for free because they're accompanying someone with a disability. I know one thing that I would really like to know myself, is there a side entrance where I don't have to deal with the crowds, especially if it is done beforehand, rather than after I've already made a long trip and after I'm already kind of sore from just sitting in the car seat and just surrounded by people really bugs me. So it makes it much better to not have to go to a crowded entrance. Now, when it comes to mobility scooters and wheelchairs, another thing that people kind of take for granted is ground texture. You've got differences of grass, gravel, pavement, cobblestone, um, transferring back and forth between different types of terrain. All of these are things that you've got to take into consideration when you're planning a trip, especially if you're dealing with a mobility scooter, because the different terrains have a different reaction when it comes to your scooter's batteries. Or if you're using a wheelchair, of course, how much effort you have to put to move yourself. And another thing people don't think about is depending on how bumpy the surface is, how much is that mobility scooter going to be bouncing? And especially if you're with fibro, that bounce can actually hurt. Another thing about is control. How are you going to be able to control that scooter, especially if you're renting one? So it's not something you've really done a lot of. If you're going into gravel or cobblestone, it's going to affect how the scooter steers. Yes, it's very much accessible, but the question is accessible for who? When you think about gradients and slopes, especially here in Wales, a lot of the terrain is gradients. So your battery life is reduced due to the fact you deal with so many hills. And when it comes to dealing with these types of venues, there are places we would love to go. But the fact that we use mobility scooters means we can't. We would love to go into some of these caves, but we don't have the physical mobility to be able to do it on our feet, and they don't allow for scooters. When you think about ramps, yes, most disability ramps have got a requirement for their gradient. So they do really long ones to make sure they stay at a gradient. But they don't have to do that when it's the actual ground that it is. And in natural settings, the gradients are what they are. It doesn't make it easy or accessible to certain people. What about seating at the main place you want to visit? If you've got a mobility scooter and you can access it, you automatically have seating. But for the people that are walking and have a little bit more mobility, is there enough seating for you to go around the area within your limitations? My partner is less reliant on a mobility scooter than I am, but he does need to sit frequently because otherwise his COPD and his lungs, he starts having real problems. So as long as there's seating, he can walk around places. But that's something we've got to consider. How far do you have to travel between these seating areas? The ability to leave a venue and re-enter on the same day because maybe you need to go out to your car, maybe you decided to take lunch with you instead of trying to buy it at the venue to save on cost. Or maybe there's some stuff that you need to take care of that's in your car. You're using medical equipment that you don't want to carry with you but is required. So you can go out to the car and come back. Remember, distance is access. Most venues have disability access toilets, but you need to know where they're at. You need to know if they're designed around your needs. Also, if there's going to be queues. Because sometimes, as you know, toilets get full. There's a lot of people and not a lot of services. Are there places that are quiet areas? So, especially if you're someone who's neurodivergent and sensory overload, where you're away from people, to give yourself a chance to download. There are some places in venues that will rent out scooters. If the venue you're going to does that, that means you don't have to take your own. Some rent them out on a weekly basis where you can take it anywhere. Do they hire on the day or is it advanced booking only? How many do they have? Because if they only have a few, if you don't pre-book, they may be all gone the day you want to go. Never assume they're going to have a scooter there available when you arrive. That is why you always need to check and book early. Another thing you need to think about, charging. Our scooters only have a limited battery life. Will that venue allow you to charge your scooter? I have run into places where I've run out of battery and I was not allowed to charge my scooter. They said because it was a fire hazard. Do you need permission to charge your scooter? The fact is if your scooter battery dies, you're stuck. You can't move. So you need to make sure you have a backup plan. Now comes into the backup plan. When you're going on a vacation, generally you're going to someplace new. They can describe what the terrain or what the area is going to be like, but they can't know how you're going to react to it. What if the terrain is worse than you expected? What if the gravel and the bumps up and down cause you more pain? What if the weather changes? What if you start having problem with the batteries on your scooter? It's all about trying to make sure you have less stress on the day of the event. And if you plan ahead for contingencies, it actually gives you a lot of peace of mind and enables you to be able to enjoy yourself instead of worrying about the what ifs. Having a backup plan is not being negative. It's about one of those things that make these trips possible. I do want to make something clear. While the footage that is going along with most of this particular episode is from the example of us going to the medieval fair, I'm using it more as display. It's not about the fair itself. This is all about just how to plan and the things to think about when you're planning to go on a trip. And we're using this fair as real world examples in how you can make a trip accessible, even if it is in a historical location. One of the things that I'm sure you've picked up by now is I love going to historical places. Ugh. Just going to these areas and seeing all how beautiful things were done in the past and how we've built upon them is something I find fascinating. And that makes these places some of my favorite places to go. However, I do run into accessibility issues because a lot of them, some have been adapted for accessibility, some have not. The fact is many of these places are protected. There's only so much they can change to make them accessible, simply due to laws and because of historical societies. When you think of all this planning, it sounds exhausting, doesn't it? God knows it can be. You've got so many things you've got to think about that so many others don't have to. If you're an able-bodied person, all you got to do is say, I buy a ticket, I'm off and going. God, I wish we could do that. Unfortunately, it's not a reality. When we plan ahead, what we're doing is we're giving ourselves more options. We are giving ourselves less energy costs because we break it down into different steps. Heck, if you need to, get a piece of paper and write a list and take care of it over a couple weeks. It preserves your energy and it enables you to go places you never thought you could. Having fibromyalgia or having to use mobility aids does not mean we can't go do things that are enjoyable for us. It just means we've got to think about them and accomplish our goals differently. I wanted to start with planning, but this was a bridge into a series of videos. The next one coming up is about some of the adaptations I've done to our van. And then over the course of the next several videos, I'm going to discuss how those things planned went and what our trip was like. Accessible traveling is not just about where we go. It's how we go, it's how we plan, it's how we prepare, and it's about how we spend our time over the course of the trip. If you were to tell somebody one thing you think is the most important about pre-planning and travel, what would it be? Because you never know when somebody else may not think of that. So if that helps you, feel free to stick around. I know how isolating fibromyalgia can feel, so I have started a Discord where my hope is that people can come, talk, share experiences, and just feel less alone. I'll leave a link to that below. And if you'd rather reach out privately, I am including my email as well. These videos are written from my own personal experiences. They are not meant as a medical diagnosis. They're not meant as medical advice. I'm just trying to share ways that I've learned to deal with the illness from over 3 decades of experience.